like shoot for the moon, go for 100 different segments at the same time. In reality, they should try to grow as if they were a bootstrap company. I think that the purpose of a homepage is to function as part of your marketing assets. It is not a Wikipedia page. It is to function more akin to the storefront. People interact with homepages. They often don't read at all. They scan. Positioning in general, as I shared, you're trying to get clarity. It's all about clarity. And clarity comes from specificity. It comes from a deeply held belief that the more clear you are about what you do, the more likely someone will want to buy you. Product management and product marketing, or even we could say product strategy and go-to-market strategy, are two sides of the same coin.
Welcome to today's edition of the Product Growth Podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. Anthony Pierri is a legendary writer about product marketing, and he happens to be one of my favorite follows on LinkedIn. He's written some of the most popular pieces on the topic of product marketing that I've ever seen, and that includes this newsletter, where about a year ago he wrote one of our most popular posts. He's done all of this because he uses content to generate leads to his wonderful business, Fletch PMM, which you'll hear more about today, but helps startups with positioning. Anthony, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I think you're the first person to use legendary to describe something related to me. So this is a big moment. I'm feeling great.
Yeah, you've literally been in my LinkedIn feed 4 to 5 times a week for probably a year and a half plus. So at this point, I feel like I've grown along with your thinking and your content. So I really appreciate it.
Love it. That's awesome.
So we have a big podcast lined up, but where I want to start is positioning. So a lot of people listening, they might be product managers, they might be growth people, they might not be product marketers. So for everybody, what is positioning?
So if we're talking about startups, it applies to everyone. Positioning is a meta level concept that's primarily in marketing. But if we just take startups for a second, startups are usually introducing something new. It's a new way of doing things. It's a new category of tool. And any time that you're doing something new to your audience, you want to give frames of reference that help the people understand what the thing is, the value it provides, when they would use it, why they would use it, how you would use it, all these different aspects to be able to get the message across. All that framing, picking these reference points to help show the value, people have coined the term positioning to describe it. And it has kind of two aspects to it, right? It's where do you want to play in the market? So you can think of that as like the company strategy type of positioning of like, where do we want to position our product in the market? Where do we want to go after? All those types of decisions. And then there's the marketing flip side, which is what ideally would be the space in the customer's brain that we would want to own. So that whenever X happens, they think of us. Whenever Y happens, they think of us. And having these little touch points ultimately to make our marketing work better, so they have the right expectations coming into a product. If they're going to get onboarded, do they understand why they're getting onboarded? And so positioning, good positioning shouldn't just be marketing. It should cascade up and down throughout the whole journey. It should go to your product strategy and all the way through the adoption of a product, the use of it, the retention, the expansion, referrals, anything like that.
So who should be determining positioning if it's affecting so many different parts of the business?
I think it's definitely a leadership decision, and that doesn't mean leadership in isolation, but it definitely has to be representatives of sales, marketing, customer success, any of the departments who it's going to impact should either be at the table helping determine the positioning, or at least just be important stakeholders who need to be on board with the ideas and where they're going to land. But ultimately, it is a deep strategy decision that impacts a lot of things. So it can't be we gave that to the product marketing team and they're going to own positioning for the whole company. It's just not going to work, right? The moment that they start getting to deep choices that they have to make, almost always it's going to break, because it's like if we decide to position against this type of competitive alternative, that's going to have a ripple effect of how we talk about a product, which things we talk about, don't talk about, pricing implications. That's probably one of the big ones that comes up is if we position, let's say, in a specific product category, is that going to have pricing implications that's going to make us too cheap or too expensive or things like that?
This episode is brought to you by ADIO, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. ADIO makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up ADIO takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. ADIO lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. ADIO is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/productgrowth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/productgrowth. When it comes to strategy, people are always thinking about the market and the use case. And you've written about there being two types of positioning. Can you explain those?
Yeah, so positioning in general, as I shared, you're trying to get clarity. It's all about clarity. And clarity comes from specificity. And there are really two places where specificity is drawn from. It can be drawn from a specific product category that is highly understood by your target audience, or from a specific activity that is highly understood by your audience. And so what we found is that if you think of positioning as setting down an anchor, you can anchor your positioning usually around either a very, very well understood category or a very well understood use case. And one is not better than the other. One may more naturally fit the product that you've built. One may more fit your POV on the market, but both strategies are equally valid because both of them are still extremely clear and specific. So I'll give it a couple examples. If I take the category-based positioning piece, you could look at companies like Figma, extremely successful. They did not come out and say, we've created this new category, we're doing this new thing. They literally said, we are, and it was in the hero of their website when they launched, we are the collaborative interaction design tool. Interaction design tools was a highly established category. Adobe had their version of it. Sketch had their version of it. And effectively, Figma had come out and said, we have a better mousetrap, right? There's the whole thing. You can't just build a better mousetrap. Sometimes you actually can. And Figma is a great example. Figma comes out and says, we are a collaborative one. And the difference was that Adobe and all these other ones, you had to download files and share them back and forth to do anything. Figma, you could all be editing in the same file at the same time. So their differentiator within the category was that they were collaborative. Linear is a Silicon Valley darling right now, right? They're a Jira alternative. They launched with messaging that was something like the issue tracking tool you'll love using. They called out the category that they're in. We're playing in issue tracking. So immediately you go to Atlassian and Jira. And the differentiator was that you love using them because there's a large segment of engineers who hate using Jira, right? Product managers as well. And so they're able to carve out a big segment of the market, probably earlier stage companies, maybe smaller mid-market companies primarily, who weren't vendor locked in to Atlassian, who would say, oh, I would way rather use this really modern UI. So that's the category-based positioning thing. There isn't like a specific use case because both of those tools can be used for a bunch of use cases. So it's not saying, oh, you have to niche down to a specific thing. It's like, no, we're going to compete in the category with all the use cases that are associated with the category. An even funnier one, right? Arc Browser is a really hot startup right now. People are using it. I think they have like multiple millions of users. They raised $100 million. they effectively are saying we will cover all the use cases of a web browser better than the alternatives, better than Chrome, Firefox, whoever, because of these different ways that they approach it. So that's category positioning. The other side of this is use case-based positioning. A lot of times startups will combine categories, especially if we're talking B2B. They're taking a little bit of, we're kind of like a CRM mixed with a CMS mixed with a, and so they're bringing things in, which makes it hard for people to understand when to use them and why to buy them and all that stuff. So sometimes the category route actually just fades to the background. And instead, you go down to the hyper-specific use case. And so you can see lots of examples with this as well. Calendly is one we like to share because a lot of people use it. I'm trying to schedule meetings online. Calendly can own that whole use case, and for a long time, they're like, we're the easiest way to schedule meetings without the back and forth emails. So they were not calling themselves some sort of new category. They weren't putting in anything. They were just saying this use case that all these people have, we can cover it. Another one is a company called Tango. What they allow you to do is record demos of how to do something like in your browser. It's an extension, and I can basically click around in the browser to show someone how to, create a new diagram in Figma or something. And it will record my mouse clicks and then generate like a guide and a video just from what I'm doing. So they lead with that use case on their page. It's something like create software training demos in seconds or something. They didn't come up and try to make a new category for it. They were just saying, this is the use case that we're going to own. And eventually it might mature into a category that we've seen that happen. Now Calendly kind of quote unquote created that category. And now there are scheduling tools. There's tons of them, right? Chili Piper, any of the ones that you could see off the shelf that effectively do the same thing as Calendly. So in general, we see startups and companies of all sizes really falling with their individual products into one of those two different buckets.
So neither bucket is better than the other. Some people might say, oh, I'm inspired by a linear, or I'm inspired by arc, so I should go category-based positioning. Is that the right way to choose, or what's the right way for a founder or some high-level executive trying to influence the strategy to choose?
It sort of comes into your POV on the market opportunity. So, and these kind of flow in stages of maturity where if I'm doing the activity, it's a little more immature of a market. It's a little more emerging, you might say, where you're going at people who don't really have a dedicated product category yet for a specific activity that likely is a lot of people are doing, like scheduling meetings online. There just wasn't really a tool for it. So you'd send emails back and forth. You would have an assistant do it, but there wasn't like a defined thing that everyone used, like CRM, right? Like eventually customer relationship management became, it morphed from a use case into a product category. And so there's that movement from immature emerging product emerging markets that then harden into these product categories. So it's effectively like, do we want to compete in a real existing market that likely has a category on G2 or Capterra or whatever? Do we think that's where the opportunity is to be able to pull away people from these other vendors in the market? Or do we think the market is actually with these groups that don't have dedicated tools for the workflows that they're trying to do? The problem itself lives in the workflow, not necessarily a category. So it's a little bit of maturity. It's a little bit on your POV of the market. But again, both of these strategies can work. And the annoying thing is both of them could theoretically work for the same company. That you could theoretically have positioned Figma for a very specific design use case and not called it an interaction design tool. And it might have worked, right? Obviously, we can't run an A/B test because you can't roll back 10 years of the clock and, well, let's see what it looks like in the multiverse. What if you had gone this way? Like, it's very hard to A/B test like a 10-year decision. So
let's say you choose one or the other approach. Where all does that flow through to? What are the first things that you should be changing? What are the second and third order things?
Yeah, so if you take the category positioning approach, like Linear did, effectively the messaging that you're going to focus on across different assets will be around why are you different than the other people in the product category. And so the problem lives in the way that these other products work. So when you say things like Figma is collaborative, or Figma is available online or any of those things. It's in opposition to these other tools that are different. And so you want to cast yourself, hey, if you're thinking about getting an interaction design tool, don't get those other ones because this is going to be the downsides of them. You should get us instead because we're going to be a big improvement. And then that cascades into, ideally, the top of funnel stuff, the middle funnel, bottom funnel, and then even into the product. Like a great example of this was Loom. Loom picked the use case. They did a use case-based approach around updating your team. So it was something like skip the meeting, send a Loom, update your team way faster, something like that. That was like what their hero was for a while. They happened to stumble into the COVID times and benefited from this great market shift where all of a sudden the use case of updating your team, not in a meeting, but online, became incredibly powerful when everyone moved to remote work. But they actually did a great job of cascading that use case, not just into their marketing, but into the product. So when you would go into the product and you would be seeing the analytics, they would give you stats. Here's how much time you skipped that would have been in meetings because of it. So they took this positioning around why you're using it, how you're using it, and the messaging cascaded, not just from the ads that they were running, from the internal stuff that they had on the web page and the homepage, but also all the way into the product experience, which I don't see as many people doing this, at least as well as Loom did. But that to me is like the gold standard, where you came for a specific use case to be solved because of what you saw in marketing. You were greeted with really good messaging around it on something like a homepage or a product page, and then you go into the product and it carries the way through. That's like what really unlocks a lot of that like viral word of mouth stuff.
You heard it here first. Product changes unlock impacts to positioning. So for all the product managers wondering what the so what is for me, it's about bringing it into the product. And what might be some other examples outside of Loom where you've seen that done well or done poorly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ones that are done poorly. There's probably more ones that are done poorly, where the marketing and even the handoff from marketing to sales is really funny. So I'll see this a lot with, and I don't want to name names, but a lot of companies where they're doing category creation, it's almost always, this is going to sound really mean, but it's almost always when the company is highly sales led and really they're growing based on the sales team, and they hire a high level marketer, and the marketer is like, what am I going to do all day? Because I don't, it's like mainly sales led anyways. So the marketer doesn't have that much time, or has a lot of time in their hands. And they're like, let's make a category. Let's just let's freaking do category creation because I got nothing else to do. And then they'll launch all this stuff. They'll put it out and they'll be like, we're called, and this is not picking on Clary or Gong, just as an example. We're called revenue intelligence or whatever the version they throw out. And then when those people get on the sales call, the sales team is like, the prospect goes, what the hell is revenue? And then they're like, it's basically like a call recorder, or it's like, oh, it's basically forecasting. And they'll take the big, huge positioning stuff that happens up here, and they'll just throw it out because they know how silly it is. And they're like, I'm not going to explain this dumb thing that marketing came up with. You're here for forecasting. That's really what it is. We're a really, really good forecasting tool. And then the prospect is like, oh, that's great. I read all these big LinkedIn posts about what you guys are. I didn't really get it. And so, I'm glad I understand it now, until they'll just break it. So like that happens a lot more than we would like to admit, where you've got some really cool out brand focus, like we created the category. And then in the sales call, the sales team is dealing with real people who are trying to buy the product. And they're like, oh yeah, don't worry. It's not nearly as silly as it sounds. Like we're a cool, good forecasting tool. Like, great, let's go.
And I imagine that breakdown happens even more often in the product, where even if you get marketing and sales on one page, the product doesn't reference it again.
For sure, 100%. Yeah, and that's even a bigger one. Like here's another example was DocuSign. I think the category they positioned around was intelligent agreement management. And it's like, what does that mean? And when you go in the product, it would be like, here's the e-signature, here's the proposals. Like, what happened to the old agreement management concept or whatever that means, right? Like, that all went out the window, and it's like, oh, we're just doing document signing, which is where the name came from, DocuSign, right?
Yeah, I think that A lot of people, we've talked about failures on the category side where they're basically not bringing the category into the product. Are there also failures of not bringing it into the product on the use case side?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's times when the use case is a mismatch where there's use cases that they talk about at the higher level that don't actually make it into the product because it's maybe just different. So often what will happen is a collection of use cases, what they'll do is they'll summarize the collection of use cases into like a bigger, broader use case that doesn't really match what people are looking for. So oftentimes people will come to one website that a product that maybe does 10 different things. We will often ask the clients we work with, okay, so you list these 10 use cases. Do people come looking for all of them? And they're like, no, they're coming for one or the other. And so like they'll take a summary level use case for these 10 that nobody is looking for, right? That's like, well, I'm trying to, roll out business transformation, whatever. And it's like, is anyone coming for that? They're like, I don't know. It was we were trying to summarize 25 different things. And it's like, okay. So there will be that side too, where there are hyper-specific use cases in the product that the product does really well, but the marketing language actually obscures them because usually what they think is if we elevate any of these actual use cases that they're looking for, we will theoretically drive them away from other use cases that we would maybe want to upsell or cross-sell, or even just other segments who might be more interested in the other ones. But in the process of creating these kind of bland, generic use cases that are really broad, that they don't really mean anything, they end up alienating everyone, and nobody understands what the product does. Even if it was like in reality, actually the product did the exact thing that I was looking for, you would never know it because it was hidden under 10 layers of, drive business outcomes, do this use case that's super broad and things like that.
Okay. So that's maybe one set of problems in positioning where you don't extend it across the business to sales or to product. What are the broader buckets or other problems in positioning people should be aware of?
A lot of times people believe that you can operate multiple positioning strategies at the same time, even if they don't have the go-to-market muscle to bring them to life. So we see this all the time where it's like an early stage company, maybe even a little bit of growth stage, and their eyes are bigger than their stomach. They're like, I want to win over these 10 different departments and these 10 different industries, and I want everyone to know that we do all of these things. And then they don't have enough people in sales and marketing, customer success, right, to support any of these things. And so what ends up happening is they try to push all of them at once, and they either stuff the homepage or the website with all these different messages for all these different people together, and it becomes this big jumbled mess, or they do that more like summarizing across a bunch of different industries, and they try to find a common thread that doesn't really exist, and they create this messaging that's very bland and watered down and undifferentiated. So we see that a lot of times, that when you're trying to go after multiple segments, they'll look to their big counterparts, like the really big companies that they love, and they're like, well, Apple does that, and Microsoft does that, or whoever. And it's like they are so exponentially larger than you, and they have entire go-to-market functions for each of these different segments and industries. Salesforce is a great example. They have versions of the product for 50 different industries, and people will try to adopt that positioning strategy, but they'll have one SDR, one marketer. And I always will try to bring the up in the clouds thing down to ground level. And one company we were working with, they were like, we have these 10 industries we think we're going to win over. And I was like, okay, so how big is your sales team? And they're like, we're onboarding an SDR on Monday. And I was like, okay, who's he or she going to call on Monday? They're going to call, 150 financial services companies. And then on Tuesday, they're going to call 150 healthcare companies. And then on Wednesday, they're going to call 150 logistics companies. And I was like, and so is this like a super senior level person who can speak to all these different industries in really deep depth to like be able to have these conversations in a cold call environment? And they're like, no, we just hired them out of high school. Like, okay, so you're expecting them to know these industries in depth to be able to execute on all 10? And they're like, yeah, I don't know about that. And I'm like, well, let's talk about your marketer. Like, are they going to run an ad campaign for logistics companies on Monday and then a completely different one for the financial? And they're like, oh man, you just see that like just get like crestfallen. And I'm like, you cannot actualize this multi-segment positioning. You don't have the team for it. You don't have the resources for it. And so it's okay. And then I try to give them examples, right? Amazon's a perfect one. Jeff Bezos at the beginning, he said, I'm going to sell everything you can imagine. There's like video recordings of him saying this. But then he said, I can't go from zero to everything. Why don't I start with books? And he didn't move on books until he was literally the market leader in books, until Barnes and Noble was like, we got to get this company, we got to stop this company. They're going to put us out of business. And they were the market leader in book sales. Amazon surpassed them, and then they started broadening. So most of these companies will try to move beyond one segment when they don't even have 1% domination of one of the segments. They'll say, well, I got the $1 trillion opportunity from these 10 others. And it ends up just really hurting them.
Okay. So we've touched on this a little bit, but what are the kind of precise differences in positioning between those early and then growth stages?
So early stage companies, they usually have one product in most cases. And so the brand and the product kind of coexist. They're the same thing. When you market the brand, you're likely marketing the product. Once you get to growth stage, you actually start getting multiple different products. And each of these products have their own product positioning. Sometimes for even different groups within it. But we have a hot take that every product has one ICP. Not every company, every product has one ICP. Companies may actually have different business units that are equally important. And they say, we have the enterprise side, we have the PLG side, and they really are 50-50. Okay, great. When it comes to individual products, though, there are segments. I was actually reading an article about the company that sells like raspberries and strawberries and stuff. And even they were like, their top ticket person, it was something like, suburban moms. Like they had these like 5 things. And I'm like, something as simple as like raspberries, they have an ICP. So there is always going to be one group that likes your product more than everyone else, that buys more of it, that has better word of mouth, that's, easier to close, all sorts of easier to upsell, is happier when they're in the product, retains it, all that stuff. There's always going to be one of those. So product positioning as an early stage company is much simpler in a lot of aspects, where you can say, all right, we're just going to try to figure out who we want to position for. And growth stage gets its own challenges because you start getting a lot of different products. And so even though you would do the same product positioning exercise for each product, you might have to do a higher level brand positioning across the suite. What do we stand for as a brand? And that really is a different function than product marketing. It's a brand marketing function. It's like, what do we want to be known for? Like when Nike runs their ads, like they're showing people running and wearing the clothes, and like, because they have so many different units, and they're like, we want to be known as like the athletic brand. That's like brand positioning for a larger growth stage company, for them, way beyond growth stage, like, massive. But in general, the problems facing early stage companies and growth stage companies are similar. They just have different causes. Like the early stage companies, like, we don't know who to position for. So maybe we try to position for multiple people at the same time because they're still trying to figure it out, find product market fit. Growth stage companies, it's the same problem. We don't know who to position for, but it's more because we've got customers in all these different segments. How would we prioritize one over the other? And that becomes a strategy decision of like, do we want to have a wedge product? Like, it's crazy to me that Salesforce is a massive, multi-$100 billion company. If you go on their homepage right now, it says the hero is something like try Salesforce Starter Suite for free. So because of their strategy, they're using the homepage for the PLG product. And we think that's a pretty good best practice, that if you're going to have a PLG arm, to have PLG work, you kind of have to give them the homepage. It's like one of the most important tools for most of the PLG companies is the homepage. So you really have to kind of give them the priority. And sales-led and enterprise and stuff gets pushed down below. But even at the level of Salesforce, they are doing prioritization where they're saying, of our 50 different products, we're going to lead with this one first because it's the wedge. It's what most people should start with. Stripe is very similar. They start with their payment suite of products and then get you to want to use the other things. Stripe Atlas, right, incorporating your startup. Radar, which is around, I think, tax fraud and things like that. And so they start you with one and get you to the other ones.
Got it. So is competing on price a positioning strategy?
I think it's a differentiation strategy. I think especially if you're going to be in a category, being the budget alternative is definitely an angle. Being the expensive version is definitely an angle, like the premium option. And we see this in consumer all the time, right? Like Rolex, it's the expensive luxury watch. It's way more expensive than the Timex one, right? Which is like the Timex, like, yeah, you can buy them for $15 at Walmart or whatever, and they kind of are that piece. So it's definitely part of the equation. Differentiation, I think, is a subset of positioning, where you say who are we positioning for, and then what competitive alternatives are we competing with, and how do we differentiate from them. So it's one of the levers for sure. And you could see this with companies like Canva, right? Canva came out and ripped away a ton of the market from Adobe because Adobe was charging, $50-$60 a month for the Creative Cloud, and Canva was free. And so free's pretty cheap, right? Like you can't really get much cheaper than that. And even something like ChatGPT, right? Like ChatGPT has a free version. And so it's a big competitive advantage if you can release something for free that people can just use. It is a differentiator for sure.
Got it. So differentiation and messaging are subsets of positioning. What are the other sort of concepts that people might think are supersets but are actually subsets?
Yeah, to me, I see positioning as kind of having three main buckets. It really is the segment that you're positioning for. And I want to clarify, like, people, when they hear segment, they think it has to be really small and niche and all these different things, right? Like, that's not really how segments work. Segments can actually span much larger groups. Like, if you're selling a router for your house, the segment is people who live in homes that need internet. Like, that's a pretty big segment of people, right? So it doesn't have to be like, well, it's only age, whatever. There's degrees of segments of how specific or how narrow you want to go, but they still are segments. So, any product is going to have, if you're going to position a product, will have a segment that you're positioning it for of a varying degree of specificity. So the aspects of positioning is really a segment that you're going after, a competitive alternative or alternatives, and then the third piece being your differentiation. So those three aspects are kind of like the positioning triangle, where effectively it's like, hey, we're for this per segment doing these types of things. We are better than this alternative set because we can do things over here, which is really your differentiation.
Got it. One of your most interesting viewpoints is that sales-led companies should message like they're PLG. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this is a hot take, and it comes from a deeply held belief that the more clear you are about what you do, the more likely someone will want to buy you. And so I truly believe, and we've seen some companies do this, like very large companies, like backdoor conversations we've had with publicly traded companies, where they went from a more closer to a PLG style message where it was like, this is what the products do, how they work, and they replaced them to a more traditional like enterprise or sales-led style messaging, which is vague, accelerate business value type statements, right, throughout the whole thing. And we've seen them say that they saw their conversions plummet, because what people forget is like, I'm selling to the enterprise. I think some people literally imagine that they are selling to a building. Like, I'm looking at a giant building and pitching my product to the building. But even in the enterprise, humans read the page. And so when humans read pages, you can give them one of two options. You could give them a message that explains what the product is and does, or you can give them a vague message that's confusing and generic. And people often have this weird association where they think enterprise buyers like to be confused. They like to be dazzled by the mystery and like, ooh, this sounds exciting. I don't know what it is, but I can't wait to get on a sales call to find out what it is. And I just fundamentally disagree with that premise. I think that humans like to understand what they are looking at. And so any company, if they do a better job, a clear job of explaining what the product is and what it does and when you would use it and how it works and all that stuff, I think anyone who is visiting websites to learn information would actually benefit from you actually saying it. And I get why it gets like this, because people will say the business leaders are so many levels removed. They don't care about how the product works. And I'm like, if they don't care how the product works, they're not going to be visiting the homepage. And if they are going to visit the homepage and they see, we transform your whatever, they're also not going to care about that. Like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of a company saying that they're going to transform my organization. Like, this is so new and differentiated. Like, come on. Like, this is, people have been messaging that way for the last 20 years and everyone promises it and most people underdeliver. So that's kind of my hot take around messaging, that if you just pretend you're PLG, I think you'll get more enterprise interest as well.
Okay, so I think this really relates then to two key concepts that you've helped us learn about messaging. The first is that, you have to be really clear. But the second I think we could double click on is that you need to not talk about fifth order effects. You need to talk about first and second order effects. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so this is just a way that we've used to try to explain this concept, that it's anytime you use a product, there is the first thing that happens is some good outcome. And we would call that like the first order outcome or the first order benefit. So if I think, what's the first order benefit of using Asana? It's probably going to be a little bit more organized than I was before, right? I go from no to-do list. Now I have a to-do list for my projects or whatever. My team's a little bit more organized. That's like the first order benefit of that. But then if I say, well, causally, if I can be more organized, maybe I can get more done. And if I can get more done, maybe I could ship more features. So right now we've gone 2 or 3 steps away, right? Like more organized would be the first order benefit that would then ideally cascade into getting more done, which would be the second order benefit, which would ideally cascade into maybe shipping more features. When then the fourth order benefit might be like, and if we could ship more features, customers would probably be more excited about us. So then that's 4 orders away, and you say, and if customers are more excited about us, they probably would want to renew at a more frequent rate, or maybe they want to tell other people. Now we're 5 orders or 6, I've already lost count. And then beyond there, you say, and that could really increase our revenue. So that story told by a competent sales rep is very compelling. An AE, a senior level AE, can sit down and make the business case after a lot of discovery and research of why adopting Asana is going to boost the revenue of an enterprise company. A website homepage is not going to do that. They're just not going to believe it. When you go to that level and you're so many levels removed from what the product actually does, and you say, boost your revenue with Asana, right? I think PandaDoc I once called them out publicly, and I love them. I use PandaDoc. We use it for our company. It's a document signing software, and it was something like their hero was like increased revenue with PandaDoc. And I was like, I posted about them once, and I said, I love PandaDoc so much. I've never once in my entire life said, I love PandaDoc because it increases my revenue. I would only ever say, I love PandaDoc because it makes, e-signature and keeping track of contracts and stuff like so much easier than what we were doing before. And so it's that concept of when you move to these multi-order benefits, they get unbelievable and people just start being like, I call BS, because especially in the world of software, everyone is over-promising and under-delivering. Either on marketing or product, right? You have these amazing product claims of what it's going to do, and that doesn't deliver. So we are trained to smell the BS when people start saying these things. But again, a talented salesperson, you pay them 6-7 figures a year because they can convince someone that Asana is a revenue generator, not just an efficiency boost. The website can't do that. One other aspect, too, of why we say to avoid these multi-order benefits is they're highly undifferentiated. Like if I walk out to increase revenue, any other product, ultimately you could probably walk up to increase revenue if you're just going up the value chain, whether it's MailChimp, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's Stripe. There's probably a way that I could make that story get to revenue. And so when I say increase revenue, I have removed all the things that make me magical, all the things that make me me, all the reasons you would use Stripe over any of the alternatives, because I've led with this high level undifferentiated benefit.
Let's talk about one of the biggest untapped opportunities in product management, unstructured data. You've got tons of it. Customer calls, emails, surveys, tickets, Slack messages, you name it. We all know that hidden in that chaos are the insights that could define our next product feature. But how do you extract those insights without losing hours sifting through the noise? That's where BuildBetter.ai comes in. Build Better doesn't just organize your data, it transforms it. Imagine every customer call, every internal discussion instantly turned into structured, actionable insights. That's BuildBetter.ai. Ready to transform how your team handles unstructured data? Head over to BuildBetter.ai and see for yourself. Use code Aakash15 for 15% off your first 3 months and get 5 hours of free recording time. That's BuildBetter.ai, because in product management, insights are everything. And that brings us nicely into the second section of our conversation. So we've just gone through our masterclass in positioning. And what did Anthony mention? There's a difference between how you position in a sales call versus on your homepage. And that's where we want to double click now, your homepage. What is the purpose of a homepage?
I think that the purpose of a homepage is to function as part of your marketing assets. It's not, in my opinion, it's not a Wikipedia page. It's not to tell everyone everything that you do. It is to function more akin to the storefront. When you walk past, back in the day when we would go to the mall, I think malls actually are still doing okay in other countries, but in the U.S., malls have really died. And so when you used to go to the mall and you walk past the storefront, you would see, let's say it's a clothing store, maybe H&M. You would see 3 mannequins standing up there with outfits. And the idea was, can these mannequins entice me enough to go inside and see the rest of what's going on? And when I walk into H&M, what do I find? I find more than the 3 outfits. I find that there's a men's section, a women's section, a kids section, all sorts of different things that I maybe would be interested in. But the homepage is more like the outside storefront. You are not trying to show every single section of the store. You are trying to say, what would be some representative samples of things that my product can do, that it can help with, that, the features it has, whatever it might be, that would get people to take the next step. And that next step might be visiting a subpage to figure out more stuff, like walking over to the section of the store, or that might be getting on a sales call, right? Especially if it's a faster converting product or something. I might, even with a PLG product, I might be jumping right into the product from the homepage. And that would be me exploring the rest of the store. Like the whole PLG strategy is getting them on there and then actually getting in, like walking inside. So it's like what you don't want to do is take the front of H&M and stuff 50 different mannequins that are stacked on the top of each other with all their clothes. Like, this is all of our clothes. Like, aren't you so excited? And it's like, no, this is really overwhelming. I'm just trying to get a loose sense of what you do. And I will make the determination if I want to go in and find out more.
So stuffing the page and making it Wikipedia is one bad habit of homepage creators. What are the other bad habits?
A lot of the stuff that we've mentioned, right? Like leading with all these high-level outcomes. When people interact with homepages, they often don't read at all. They scan. Sometimes we'll work with like really deep dev tool type companies. And what we'll find is when we go to write the page, like sometimes we are not subject matter experts in some of these industries. So we rely on the companies, the startups to be SMEs to help bring us up to speed, and we do our best to try to keep along with it. But sometimes I'll like actually ask someone that I know, if I know someone in the industry, to double check something. I'll be like, hey, does this make sense? And so I have a good friend of mine is a senior software engineer at Microsoft. And so sometimes I'll ask him, hey, can you scan this page that can you just double check, does this feel like this makes sense? And when I watch him read the pages, he legitimately, like if you think of the trackpad, he's literally, he pulls it up and he's like this. And I'm like, you're not even reading it. Like, and he's like, yeah, I'm just trying to get a good sense of it. And like, that's how people read pages, right? Like they just scan, they just jump from headline to headline to headline. So the problem becomes when you take that marketing advice, the best practice of lead with the outcome. If you there's a fun exercise. If you blur out the body text under each of your sections and you just leave the headline, if people just read the headlines, would they understand what's going on? And there's a company called Walnut. They're an interactive product tour, product demo company. And they're I don't know if they still have it. Hopefully they changed it. But each of their sections was like, I can't remember. It was like save time, make more money. It was like all these outcomes. And if you blank out the body text, you would have no idea what the product does. And so you just skip. So we always say you should flip the order. Rather than leading with the outcome, lead with the differentiated product capability. What are the things you can do? Because scanning those in the headline actually does help you get a sense, oh, interesting. This company's pretty cool. They let me do this, let me do this, let me do this. And if you really have to walk out why some of these things matter, it's possible that the person is not quite in market yet enough to care. And it's likely not that the homepage is going to suddenly get them to care. Ideally, it's like you've done a good job and you're higher up the funnel that when you actually show them this is what the product does, they're already primed for it, right? Like if I land on Loom's page and I have no reason to be sending videos, they haven't convinced me earlier on, and it's like, hey, this is how you can actually record your face and the screen at the same time, which was like a really powerful differentiated capability that made them stand out. If I'm so far out of market, I'm like, why would I want to do that? But in reality, if I'm in market and I've been trying to send people videos and maybe I've been editing together, like putting my face over it or something, some videos, and I see that and it's like you can put your face and the screen at the same time, immediately I get the benefit. You don't have to spell it out for me, right? Like I'm not a lot of times like it's like we're very patronizing of our potential customers. We're like, we have to explain to them why this would matter. And it's like, not necessarily, like the famous one is the Apple 1,000 songs in your pocket with the iPod. That was one of their early messages. That to me is actually a product capability. It's just talking about how many songs you could store, right? So store 1,000 songs in your pocket or carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's talking about what I can do with the product. I don't then have to walk out the benefit of like, so I don't have to carry a CD case. Like it's pretty obvious why it would be cool to be able to store more songs in my pocket than what I was able to do before. So that's really one of the things we see on homepages. It's just flipping the order, right? Don't lead with the outcome. End with the outcome, right? Lead with what the product actually does that's more differentiated.
Very interesting. And a lot of companies often start fairly clear. They might start with some core product differentiation, but that message clarity tends to degrade over time. One of your most memorable posts shows over subsequent years the homepage of different companies and how it degrades over time. Why is that always the case?
I think it's a couple different reasons why. One, when companies get bigger, they get more complex. And a lot of times, if they don't have strong leadership at the top, what will end up happening is you get lots of high-level executives who are very driven people who have worked really hard to own the P&L of one of the 20 products of X company. And so what ends up happening is you get the turf war where it's like, I'm owning the P&L of this product and I want to make sure that it succeeds. I want more real estate on something like the homepage, because if I could get up on the top of the homepage, I'm going to be killing it. All my metrics are going to be great. But you've got a bunch of the stakeholders, all these different leaders who all have very strong opinions and want to be at the top and do well for their branch of the business. And if the leadership is not very strong, a lot of times, rather than making the hard strategy decision, they will hire a brand agency to come in and effectively unify the team. And the brand agency is not incentivized to say, hey, Jeff's product over there does 80% of the revenue and all these other guys only do 20%. Like, we should probably put Jeff's product up at the top. A brand agency is not going to do that. The brand agency is going to say, hey, committee, how can we get all these people really excited, right? How can we get all 20 of you on the same page? And then you end up with, where work happens, Slack, right? Like you get these brand phrases that are really cool feeling, but effectively are just ways that are like lowest common denominator messaging, wherever all the execs are like, well, I know that my product is not up top, but I'm just glad that Susie's product isn't up top either. None of us get it. If I can't have it, then none of us should get it. And we got this cool message. So a lot of times it's something along those lines where it's like a patch for a strategy hole. Another problem is it's actually like you can point at a specific person, and I won't say any names, but you can actually track like, oh, company raised Series B, they hired X new CMO wants to leave their mark on the company, they got a huge budget, they hire X company, big agency to come in and do the rebrand, and then they just destroy all the messaging. And And then usually the CMO either gets fired or they leave and jump to another company. And they're like, this is great. And then you get this leftover of like, oh yeah, we worked with this branding agency. They came with this new logo, these colors, spent like $1 million on it. And now our messaging's way worse. And it's like, but that CMO, he or she left their mark on the company. They really did some good work there. So you could track a lot of it. Like the bad messaging of a company sometimes is directly correlated with the hire of their first really senior, chief marketer.
What a shame. So if you're a senior marketer and you're trying to avoid that degradation of clarity, what are the steps you should be taking to create your homepage?
In general, I think it is trying to have very hard conversations with your leadership, the other people, and basically saying like thinking at the company level and not necessarily the individual P&L of each product. And I think when the leadership is strong, they do this intuitively. Like Apple and Microsoft don't suffer from the problems I'm talking about because they have really strong leadership. So when you go on Apple's page, the hero of their homepage is usually the product that matters to the company most at that time of the year. So their hero is changing for each important thing that they're pushing because again, the homepage is a marketing asset. It's not some sort of big brand flag or some sort of Wikipedia page. It's a marketing asset to ideally push sales, right? So when Apple and Microsoft, they use different hero images and different products for different times based on the things that they're trying to push. That only works when you have strong strategy alignment from all the senior leadership, because that's going to mean if I'm in charge of the iPod or the iPad and from this month to this month, it's just all MacBook, I need to understand the broader strategy and need to be bought into it. That it's like, yeah, I'm going to get pushed in the background for a little bit, but that's because of this broader strategy that actually makes sense in the context of our company.
Okay. So moving on from homepage to our third section of our chat, overall growth topics. Some people, they might finally get the resources together. Maybe they are that new CMO to do a rebrand. How do you nail that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the rebrand, it depends, right? It's like brand. People would probably accuse me of being anti-brand, and we've come out anti-brand sometimes. So it's not a totally unfair assumption. But the funny thing is that me and my business partner Robert, like unintentionally, neither of us are like strong brand marketing people. Totally by accident, we have created a brand aesthetic that goes with our company. We have these specific types of designs we do. We have a specific color scheme. We have a way that we write and that we talk, the way that we do our posts, the way we show up, the opinions, the POV, all of that stuff kind of makes up brand, right? Like parts of it. And obviously the way we run the sessions, the product and stuff like that, it's all pretty cohesive and not really on purpose. It was totally an accident. Just over time, we were like just using the same style and aesthetic and stuff like that. And it has become a huge asset for us because people will say, I knew that post was a Fletch post before I even saw your name. And I knew just based on the moment that I saw the color scheme and the things like that, I was like, I need to stop and read this. And people will associate us with this style, and we've seen other people, actually a lot of people copy the style and try to do it like. And so there's lots of examples of brand that's really, really powerful. So I don't want to diminish brand at all, but to me, it always is in service of the actual value delivered by the products, right? And I think I've used the analogy before that it's like, who's holding the baton? Pre-product market fit companies, even early stage, maybe beginning growth stage, the product marketing should be holding the baton. They're leading the charge. Once you have many products with product market fit, potentially the message, the baton can be passed and can be more around, all right, now we maybe are talking at the brand level more frequently. But in general, on assets like homepages and things like that, I think for the most part, product marketing should still play a pretty big role. Like you can't read Apple's page without seeing all the product marketing happening at essentially every level, that they're showing products, versus if you read ServiceNow's page, you'd be hard pressed to find a single product anywhere. It's only brand language. It's all about we transform this, we transform that. We're for innovative leaders. This is what we stand for. Here's the awards we've won. We're the top in the quadrant. And you can't find a single product anywhere. So there's a balance. You really do want to have both working in conjunction together. And brand is very powerful. And potentially, like if we're talking about what truly leads the page, like even just in the first thing you see, I think when you get big enough, you can lead with the cool taglines because you've kind of earned the right because people in the segments you're going after really know what you do.
Okay. One of your interesting saying is VC-backed companies should pretend they're bootstrapped. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's funny because depending on where you hear, who you ask, that's either highly controversial or extremely obvious. So it's highly controversial in the examples where VCs are like, shoot for the moon, go for 100 different segments at the same time, try to tackle everything, be extremely unprofitable on purpose to win the market. And we've seen the examples, right? Airbnb and Uber, where that kind of worked, right? Like it was like Airbnb wasn't going to get off the ground, and they really have a strong moat because not really anyone has been able to get to that same level of users and things like that to make it actually make sense that you could book a place in any country, anywhere. So there are examples like that, but I feel like most startups are not like that. And in reality, they should try to grow as if they were a bootstrap company and say, if I was a bootstrap company, would I spend all this time on some sort of weird category creation exercise? Would I try to build it? You probably wouldn't, because bootstrap companies are like, I need to make money. I actually need to get market share like now. I can't like wait for this big fancy moment in the future where everything, comes together and all of a sudden I'm this profitable. I was unprofitable for 10 years and then I became this giant unicorn. Like that's not how most successful companies are even built, even in the venture-backed world. And so, you take people like Y Combinator. That's what they basically preach. Is they basically say like it's about getting customers. Like go out there and get customers. And a lot of VCs these days now are wising up to this, and they're like, we're not going to give you a Series A unless you can show that you have customers who actually are buying you. And so when you have a complicated product, or maybe you're going after enterprise and it's really high ACV and things like that, like you can't dilly-dally around. Well, I'm going after 10 segments at once. Like you kind of have to pretend you're bootstrapped and be like, what would I do to get customers? I would not try to go after 10 industries at the same time. I would say, what's going to get me the next 5 customers that will keep the lights on until the end of the year? I should just go see if I can go to like, hey, the retail guys over there really liked us. Logistics seemed like they maybe would like us. Financial services seemed like they would like, but the retail guys over there was a lot of signal. Let's just point the ship at them for the next 6 to 12 months. That's like bootstrap behavior. Like I want to get this thing off the ground and get some customers to keep the lights on. VC backed, a lot of times they live in la la land because they're like, I'm just trying to raise my next round. And they end up screwing themselves in the long run. Where if you think of VC as an accelerator, maybe you only take one round at the beginning. You don't keep doing rounds, but you take it as an accelerator to really try to get the thing off the ground. I think it just greatly increases the chances that you're going to be able to be successful. Maybe you won't be $100 billion company, but lots of unicorns were built that way. They were really smart about how they went after different segments, and they sequenced themselves out, and they used like the bowling pin strategy. Like we knocked down this, we really got market share in this one area, and we used that to fuel the next ones we were dominated. Because if you're successful in one market, you can hire a lot more people to go after multiple markets rather than just hiring everyone at once, getting this big bloated company before you actually have the momentum.
Another one of your controversial opinions is that all software should cost less than $50. As someone who sold some $100 plus per seat software, that piqued my interest. Why is that?
Yeah, so this is sort of tongue in cheek, and it comes from a problem that we keep seeing happening over and over and over again with the companies that we work with. Usually, what will happen is someone will create software that they believe is 10x better than the alternatives, and so they say, "I'm justified in charging 10 times more." And so then, what ends up happening? Eventually, when we get to the core of what does your product actually do, it will fall into an existing bucket. And they may be way better than the other products in that existing bucket, but the founders will not want to put themselves in the bucket because of the price. And they will say, I can't be in that bucket because there's tools that cost $20 a user. And it's like, you're not actually worth $1,000 or $10,000, whatever crazy numbers you're charging. And a lot of them are charging a ton of money. And prospects are not stupid. So like, you can imagine a friend of mine is an account executive at Salesforce, and he's selling to small businesses. And small businesses, if they are in the know, they will say, why would I pay $2,000 for your license, $10,000 for implementation, when HubSpot is $20 a user? And the answer is brand credibility. Salesforce is a better brand, right? Like, and the thing is, like, Salesforce can pull that off because they are the market leader. But flip it, the market leader is the $20 software, and you are the startup, and you have no brand credibility, and you're saying, don't get Salesforce or don't get HubSpot. Choose us. We're 10 times more expensive. And they're like, but you effectively do the same thing as they do. And so what happens is the pricing sets the conversation in a negative way, where they say, it would be super cool to sell this for 50 grand a pop. And it's like, yeah, I would love if money grew on trees, like there's lots of things that I would love that don't make any sense in the real world, right? And then it's like, okay, so we want to position. And so what they always try to do is they try to shift the positioning to somehow make it seem like they're worth, 50 grand, when in reality, they're probably worth $10 or $20 a user. And they're like, well, no, that's going to take so long. We're going to need so many users to get the money. And it's like the VCs, they have these expectations that we should be making a lot of money, but they didn't actually make a product that is worth that much more in reality. And the funny thing that I always go back to is like Microsoft Office 365, the enterprise edition is, I think, $50 a person. And you get PowerPoint, you get Excel, you get Word, you get Teams, you get Outlook. There's like 25 apps that literally are the lifeblood of a company. And so when people talk about price anchoring, like, you as a startup especially, are you more valuable than Microsoft Suite that powers this whole company? The answer for most companies is no. And so the price anchoring conversation really can get them in a rough spot, when in reality, it's like they can't close these deals, not because of some sort of positioning thing. People don't want to pay that much money for something that isn't actually that much better. And it would be better for a lot of these companies to level set and realize ChatGPT is free, right? The most innovative product in the last 10 years or 20 years. There is a very powerful free version, and even the pro version is $20 a user, right? And it can do way more. And you're probably the product that you're paying 10 grand for, or you're trying to get 10 grand from the users, or 50 grand, or whatever, is likely just built on the API given to you by OpenAI, and they are charging $20 a user. So it seems like there's a big mismatch in how people view this stuff. That's kind of the longer, spicier take, but yeah, it's a little tongue in cheek, but also it's sort of what I think is true.
So are there certain segments that it applies more to, like small, medium businesses or consumers versus enterprise?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it like there's clever ways to make the pricing make sense. Like if I'm paying $50 a user to get Microsoft, let's say I'm a big enterprise and I have 10,000 employees, 50,000 employees. We're not signing up on the website. We're not going in and saying, all right, I need to buy 50,000 seats from the website. You're going to have implementation partners. You might even hire a big consulting firm to roll this thing out. So like all that stuff makes a lot of sense to pay money for, because you're not paying for the software. You're paying for the change management. You're paying for the rollout. You're paying for the onboarding sessions, all the materials, the security, those types of things. Like it makes more sense. But the software itself, a lot of times just feels so unbelievably overpriced for what you're actually getting. Now, obviously, there's like critical infrastructure software, that like you probably do need to pay. And it's like, hey, I will pay any amount of money for this not to go down, right? And like, you know what I mean? Like if you need to charge me X amount of money and it will never go down, like we will pay it because our whole business would fall apart. That type of stuff like makes more sense to pay more for it. But at least the companies that we work with are not building that type of software. They're building usually efficiency software of different kinds, analytics software. And it's almost always analytics companies that really struggle with this too. Because they're like, we're not an analytics product. We're helping drive business change. And it's like, you're an analytics product. You take data and you give them insights and recommendations based on the data. Like, that's fine. That's cool. You're not going to be able to sell it for $50,000 a year, but you might be able to for $50 a person, for whoever that is.
Okay. So that concludes like our hot takes on growth section. Moving into our final section, a lot of people listening, they might be product marketers, they might be product managers, and I know a lot of your clients might even be too small to have too many PMs yet. But what wisdom would you have for those teams that they do have both the product management and the product marketing function? How should they be collaborating?
Yeah, I think the collaboration is really important. And obviously, Brian Chesky from Airbnb, he came out really recently and got everyone fired up when he said, we got rid of all of our product managers. Everyone's product marketers now. And then he kind of rolled it back and like everyone was like, that's not actually true. Like it was like a cool thing to say. And I get the sentiment behind it, right? But I think there's two extremes, right? There's the product managers who are really thinking about the user and the journey and like being deep in the weeds of like how they're interacting with it. But there's some crazy stats, and I don't even know if this is true. This is kind of one of those ones that people just throw around. It's like 80% of features never get used. It's something ridiculous, right? And so you have blood, sweat, and tears from PMs that are poured into these features to get them used. But if you can't figure out where to fit this in the overall marketing mix, like or product marketing mix, you could to be more specific. Like, how are we going to position this feature to where someone will actually want to use it and have it come up and become like a big value add? That's where I think those two disciplines can really help each other. In the same way, right? Like product marketing can get so focused on like sales enablement and these other aspects of the role that they end up forgetting about like the product management side of like what features should actually be built. And so in a perfect world, I think the two sides are really working together. Maybe even in a perfect world, it's the same person. Sometimes that's too hard, right? Because especially if you're like doing, I'm working on core product and it's like updates and things behind the scenes. Like there's not really like marketing on like security updates if you're the product manager for something like that, right? So it's obviously not like a hard and fast rule one or the other, but I do think that like PMs should be thinking like PMMs of like, how would I position this feature to make someone want to use it? If I'm building it, like where would it fit in the overall story? And on the flip side, right, like product marketers should be really closely connected to the PMs and be saying like, ideally helping to influence what features get built in the first place and like helping them understand like, hey, if you tweaked that just a little bit, like that could really fit this overall positioning narrative that we've been pushing, right? And something along those lines.
Yep. So peeling it a layer deeper, when should each function get the other function involved in their central tasks? Like a product manager, they're deciding whether something gets on the roadmap. Is that the right point to bring in product marketing? And then similarly, like as a product marketer, you're coming through on the final leg of your homepage with execs. Is that the right time to bring in PM or is that too late? What are the right times really for these main activities that we should be thinking about bringing each other in?
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, I think it's as much as they can be like attached at the hip kind of throughout. I think it's just going to go better. And we've said before that product management and product marketing, or even we could say product strategy and go-to-market strategy are two sides of the same coin, right? So we were working with a client who was trying to figure out if they should position themselves in the BI tool space, business intelligence. And she had basically said, like, our tool doesn't do everything in BI, though. Like, it does some of it, and it's definitely a big augment to the analysts who use BI tools, but it doesn't really do all of it. And so the positioning strategy, if it works, could potentially change the product strategy. So if she goes out and positions in BI And all of a sudden, these users are like, this is amazing. This is so much better than, Tableau or whatever, but I needed to be able to do X, Y, and Z to really replace my BI tool. Then that positioning has now impacted the product strategy. And on the flip side, right, like if you have features down, like let's say there's some amazing new features that the product management team has dreamed up, that might actually shift the positioning strategy. Where it would say like, we weren't considering putting ourselves in this category or going against these, but we actually just were able to figure out this amazing new feature set, and customers like the beta testers like love it. Like it's like going to drastically change how people think of our product. That you want that to influence the positioning shift as well. So the two sides really, really are going to ideally be interdependent. And like the ultimate extreme thing is like we've taken all these functions and broken them into silos for convenience sake, and you can't really get around it, right? You can't have one person. In the perfect world, it's all just one function, right? Like the marketing and the sales and the product and the customer success and the support, it's all just one function, but we have to break it up to make it work at a higher level. So the tighter aligned everyone can be, the better. And so I would say it's less of a question of when do I bring them in, of more how could we be in a rhythm where we're constantly both sides are influencing each other at every stage of the journey.
Yep. That's what I would recommend to folks too, is it starts at the leadership layer where you have to align on the strategy questions. So ideally you have like a CEO who's in the detail on product marketing and product management. But a lot of people I talk to, they're not in that situation. They're an ICPM or an ICPMM, and the leaders aren't aligned, and there isn't a CEO who's making those decisions. If you were to put yourselves in the seat of, let's say, an ICPMM who's noticing that they're not really collaborating with the PM team, what are the right steps to create that connective tissue?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about like the culture of the company. If the culture of the company allows for shifting and bending and things like that, like a lot of the startups, the cool thing is that these red tape hasn't really been put up yet, right? These norms and things haven't been hardened into policy. So things are much more malleable, which is why I think startups are kind of so fun, because they're like, everyone can kind of get in each other's business in a cool way before like, you have to go through the correct channels to talk to so-and-so, right? Like you're not there yet. So I think it's much more conversational. And then I think in the larger companies that are much more established, it's more of a question of like, do I want to stay in this company? Knowing that this is how it is. Like I have long given up on trying to lead up to the people above me. Another hot take for another day. Like I don't think leading up is really a thing. Like I think it's more you follow someone who you believe in their leadership. And if they're going in the direction, you come along for the ride. If they're not the type of leader that you would want, I don't think you're going to shift them, because they got to where they are because of their leadership focus and which way you're going. So I think it's usually a question of like, can I, through relationships and through conversations, can we try to change the culture a little bit? And if it's earlier stage, that's probably possible. And if it's later stage, it might be like, this is just not really the right place for me. And you might want to just switch to a company where the collaboration is better.
Yeah. And do you feel like there are enough companies that are collaborating in that right way? Like the clients you work with, are a lot of them collaborating well together between PMM and PM?
Yeah, we since we work with like Series B and below for the most part, they usually are pretty good. Like they are collaborating, and we'll have the PMM leadership and the PM leadership on the calls with us. And you can see in the rapport that they have together that they're working really tightly. And so a lot of times it's pretty refreshing. Sometimes when it was later, it's definitely like, a very different story. We were working with this publicly traded company, and this was just so funny. We had the director of PMM, one of their directors. They had like 10 of them. So one of the directors of PMM, I was like, can you, I was asking her, I was like, what does this specific feature do? And she was like, it streamlines communication. And I was like, no, like at a functionality level, like what am I clicking on the screen? Like what's happening? Like when would I use it? What am I clicking? Why? And she was like, that's a really hard question. And I was like, you're the director of PMM of this whole product set, And so there was clearly disconnects. Like she had been living in sales deck land and, sales enablement land and had really lost touch with the product managers altogether of like, what is this thing? Like, so it's definitely a stage thing. And I hope that like the next gen, because this is like an older company, I'm hoping that the next generation of companies, especially ones that prioritize product marketing earlier on, like keep it as a strong strategic role. And I think it was McKinsey or someone who had that article not that long ago that was like product marketing is like the new secret weapon for a lot of these companies. More people are utilizing it. Like I think there's a real world where we see like a chief product marketing officer start becoming a thing.
Oh, super interesting. And that's actually going to be my last sort of big question before we go to the lightning round. What do you see as the future of product marketing?
I think it takes a bigger seat at the table, primarily because software is getting so saturated. And so positioning in an increasingly competitive space is just going to become more and more important. And I think product marketers who are really strong strategically and get that concept and can bridge the gap between marketing and product. Because I think a lot of times when you get to bigger companies, the marketers are so divorced from product that they're living more in brand marketing land, brand awareness, that they're just trying to sponsor events and put their names on trade shows. And, we started a podcast and we're a media company now. Like all that stuff is so spread apart from the actual positioning of these products and helping like sell them that I think that the product marketer is really going to be a great addition. And even like back to Airbnb, right? Like Brian Chesky, I think he does some of the best product marketing as the CEO. Like he'll post updates about like the feature sets that they're launching and cast them in a really cool light, like on X, Twitter. And he'll do it from his personal profile and they get, millions of views and stuff. And so that to me feels more like the world we're going to get to, where the leadership and people who value product marketing, it will become more of a key discipline that's really valued. Stripe is another one too that I'm pretty sure that they really, really prioritize product marketing. I think they have some of the best messaging. I think they're like a really good example for people to look at. And they talk about it like pretty openly.
All right. So that was an amazing discussion going from positioning, home pages, growth hot takes, and we ended on product marketing and how it fits with product management. Now let's move on to the lightning round. So we're going to go through 11 questions, kind of a goofball set of questions. First one, what is your favorite hobby?
I play guitar and I write music with some of my good friends. And I'm in as embarrassing as this sounds, in my 30s, I'm in a pop punk band, and we have music on Spotify, and we actually have a song, slightly less embarrassing, maybe still pretty embarrassing, but we have one song with over 1 million streams, and we have roughly 95,000 monthly listeners. So obviously, it doesn't really make any money in the streaming world, as you can imagine, when it's 0.00001 cents or something per stream. But yeah, that's probably my favorite hobby as an adult, as sad as it sounds.
Oh my gosh, what's your band's name?
It's called Good Hangs.
All right, we'll link that in the description.
Great.
What's your favorite interview question?
Someone came up with this. Actually, I think it was my brother, and he told me this one, and I started using it, and I love it. If I hire you, what will I have to put up with? Like, what annoying things are you going to do that I will have to put up with? And I like it because it reveals how self-aware they are versus if people, it's a different way of saying like, what's your biggest weakness? Like people are not going to answer that. I try too hard, all that stuff. But if you say, what am I going to have to put up with? And like one guy we interviewed in a previous role, he basically was like, I have really bad spelling and grammar. And he's like, when I email you, they're probably going to be grammatically incorrect and I'm going to have typos and you're just going to have to deal with that. Another guy was like, I have trouble with personal space and I will email you and call you and Slack you at all hours of the day and all hours of the night. Like I'm trying to get better about it. But so I think it's a good revealing question.
All right. Now moving into books, what's your favorite product or growth book?
I love Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. I think it's probably the best book for B2B, especially tech companies, on the power of niching down, the power of focus, especially in the early days if you're doing something very new. And so I recommend it to everyone. It is pretty dense. When I first read it, I didn't really understand it, and then I read it again many years later, and it like totally blew my mind. So it's a harder read, but it's because it has so much wisdom in it.
What's a recent newsletter you've been reading?
I love Kyle Poyer's newsletter, Growth Unhinged. I love when he'll do these breakdowns of specific companies, what they did, and he gets to pull from all the data from OpenView and incorporate that in the newsletter. So I think his newsletter is great. I also think your newsletter is great. So you could give that a plug too, right?
I didn't ask him to say that, folks. What's something very few people know about you?
That's a good question. I think not as many people know I used to be a pastor, actually. So I did not come up in SaaS. I had a, maybe 12-year career working in churches in all sorts of different roles. At the end, I actually was a pastor. I would get up on stage. I would speak, do sermons and stuff every week. And so left that behind, kind of different life path later. But that's was more hidden. And I've been trying to be more open about it because I think some people just like seeing behind the scenes of where you came from. And a lot of what I was doing actually surprisingly translates pretty well to product marketing. Like a lot of what we're doing is taking these really complicated stuff from these old ancient texts and trying to make them valuable to people today. Where now I'm working with companies doing really weird, confusing technology stuff and trying to make it sound interesting to people who don't really get the nuts and bolts and stuff. So there's a lot of carryover from it.
I can tell in the podcast itself. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
I've been using software called Amy, A-M-I-E. It's like a to-do list app. The cool thing about it is that all your calendar events by default become to-do list items, and your to-do list items can be dragged onto the calendar to make it a to-do list or a calendar event. And then also your emails show up as to-do list, and you can drag those onto the calendar. So it's trying to create this unified system where all your to-dos and your emails and your events are all kind of in the same bucket, and you could look at them in a list form as to-dos. You could look at them on the calendar, or you could just separate them into their component parts. So it's been really fun.
Ooh, I'll have to check that one out. What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping or working on?
I would say, and this is stretching the definition of a product, but I would say the current service that we offer, which is a productized service, is definitely the most successful product that we've ever launched. And so me and my partner, right, we basically do this same productized service with every single company that we work with. And so we've tried different iterations, right, over the years, and the one we have now is really, really polished experience end to end. So I think that one is probably what I would be the most proud of. There's definitely been ones in the past that were bigger failures and weren't that interesting or didn't do that well, but this one feels like the best so far.
And I wanted to ask about that. What is one failure that you've learned from?
Yeah, I mean, we've tried. It was really interesting. We worked at an agency before we were on our own, and we tried a lot of different ways to get some of these things off the ground, and we tried inbound strategies that really did not work, where we were trying to get people excited for without really being specific. A lot of our really hot takes and opinions and how to grow companies and stuff kind of comes from our experience of trying all these things that didn't work. We were as an early stage company, trying to figure out to get something off the ground. We were maybe we should just try to get calls with people in one specific segment, but not really know what to sell and see if we can figure it out. And so we tried that for a while. That didn't really work at all. And then we were maybe we go the product first. So we try to figure out what the product is and then figure out who would want it without picking a segment. And then that didn't really work either. And it was only once we realized you kind of have to have a hypothesis on both, where you have a hypothesis on the product, you have a hypothesis on the market, and then you put them together and try to figure out, is this the right combination? And then they start adjusting each other. But when we were doing it before, we spent, maybe 6 months, a year trying to get one of those strategies off the ground, couldn't do it. Flipped the other, maybe another 6 months, 12 months, couldn't really get off the ground. And then it only was once we started doing both together that we could find some repeatability.
Okay, we've covered several of these, but what commonly held belief or saying that we haven't covered do you disagree with?
Ooh, that's a good question. Did I already share effectively features versus benefits that I think, don't lead with features.
Do that one.
Basically, people always say, don't lead with features, lead with the benefits. And I think it depends what they mean. Sometimes when people say benefit, they're actually describing like a product capability. Like people use that Apple example I shared before, 1,000 songs in your pocket. They say, that's a great benefit. It's like, it's not really a benefit. It's more of a capability. It's what do I do with it? I can store 1,000 songs. So if they're using benefit that way, I think that's fine advice. But in reality, most people, when they say lead with the benefit, they're thinking the business outcome, and which is how we end up with all that stuff that we were talking about before. Leading with increased revenue, save time, save money, reduce risk. Where I think that's really bad advice. And so flipping it and saying, leading with the feature and the accompanying product capability is a lot better in most cases.
Okay. Last two questions. Where can people find you online?
My LinkedIn is, if you want to just keep up with the content, you could follow me. If you want to send me a direct connect request, I connect with basically everyone. I'll probably send you a DM when you add me. It's not automated, so please do not say, is this automated? Because it just makes me feel bad of how much I'm on LinkedIn. Because people say, well, it has to be automated. You couldn't have responded that fast. I'm like, I am, in fact, on this platform all day and all night, and will reply right away. So no automation there. And then if you wanted to work with us on your positioning, your homepage, whether you're early stage, growth stage, whatever, FletchPMM.com is the best place to do that.
Okay, so his LinkedIn and Fletch PMM are also in the description. And last question, how can listeners help you?
I think, honestly, think about some of these strategies in your own companies and really try to figure out, like, what would this look like? And I always love the coolest stories are when people say, hey, we took your advice and it drastically helped our company. And they're not even customers, right? Like we've had people say, I want to give you a testimonial, and they never even worked with us, just from trying out these principles and seeing them really produce fruit. So I would say, give these things a try. And even if it's a short-term experiment, right? Like if your homepage or one of your sub pages is really, really outcome focused and really de-emphasize what the product does, try running an A/B test where you're really talking about what the product is and does and features and capabilities and functionality and things like that. And then tell me the results, shoot it over to me. I'm always interested to hear. We mostly, and maybe it's just because if people try and it doesn't work, they don't tell us, but we mostly get very positive messages. Like, I tried what you suggested and it's really helping everything. Or, I picked one of the segments. We were going after 10 segments. We picked one and now the company's really turned around. Like I have so many stories like that. And so that always keeps the energy up when I'm posting the same stuff over and over and over again.
Hardly the same stuff. He is, as I mentioned at the top, a great follow on LinkedIn. Anthony, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.